used to work part-time in a ski resort. I was in charge of the lifts, which entailed keeping an eye on customers. I had to stop the lifts if someone fell off or if the wind picked up. I was usually put in charge of the pair lifts at the very top of the mountain. The view from my station was extremely beautiful. You had a 360-degree panoramic view, and it was the most popular course in the resort. The skiers and snowboarders go down this gentle slope full of curves, leaving puffs of fresh powdered snow behind. If you come on a sunny day, it'll be an experience you won't soon forget. This course isn't for adrenaline junkies or for those who want something hard and complicated. It's more for leisure and sightseeing, so on the weekends it becomes very crowded. On weekdays, however, it's basically empty, and there can be days where I don't even have to step a foot outside from the station that's located right next to the ski lift. At this time, I was working with Masahiro, a guy in his 30s. He was a really outgoing and friendly guy, always telling jokes and making others laugh. He was using the employee dorms just like I was, so we would oftentimes have dinner together and have drinks well into the night. One day, there was a snowstorm, and sitting inside the station looking out, we could only see a white blurry haze. The visibility was really bad, so it obviously wasn't safe to ski, and the resort was basically empty. I remember the smell of kerosene from the heater and the whirring sound from the lifts as we watched them come into view, then disappear again. I noticed that Masahiro was looking a bit down. Maybe he was feeling depressed about having to work in this snowstorm, but he somehow looked more troubled than that. After a bit of uncomfortable silence, he spoke his first words. "Can I tell you something?" I knew it. I poured us another cup of coffee and sat and listened to what he had to say. He started telling me about what he experienced as a child. Apparently, he's from a place where it snows a lot in the winter. He was only about 4 or 5 at the time, and every time it snowed, he ran outside to play, building snowmen and igloos. On that particular day, it was already the 5th day or so of heavy snow, and he was tired of playing outside in the cold, so he stayed in the house, staying warm under the kotatsu. Both of his parents worked, so his grandparents who lived with them usually took care of Masahiro, but they were out that day. He vaguely remembers that the neighbors had invited them over. He didn't have anyone to play with and was bored, but he didn't want to go outside because it was snowing quite heavily. So he decided to just watch some telly. The show he was watching went into a commercial break when he felt something weird. He was just a young boy, so he couldn't understand what he was feeling, but it was a strange feeling. He felt like he'd seen this exact same scenario before. "You mean, like a déjà vu?" I asked. He nodded his head in response as he took a sip of his coffee. "I'm sure you've all experienced déjà vu before. The sensation that you've already been in the exact same place doing the exact same thing, but you don't have any actual memory of it. You just feel it. Some say it has something to do with the circuitry in your brain, and those who believe in the spiritual think that it's memory from your past life. When it happens, some people just ignore it, while others try to dispel the feeling as quickly as possible. Masahiro was neither of those. He was actually enjoying this sensation because he felt like he could almost foresee the future. Just then, he heard loud knocks coming from the front door, and then the doorbell rang. He was home alone, so he had to go see who it was. When he got to the front door, he could see the shadow of someone through the clouded glass panel. He was still experiencing déjà vu up to this point. He suddenly felt uncomfortable as the déjà vu slowly faded, and he continued to look at the white shadow on the other side. The shadow was swaying from side to side. At first, he thought the person's hair was being blown around by the wind, but something was off. He couldn't quite pinpoint it, and considering he was only little, he did what he was taught to do by his parents and asked, "Who is it?" Maybe the shadow didn't hear the question or didn't care, but it asked a question of its own.
"Is Misaki there?"
The voice didn't sound male nor female, but it was a human voice. Masaharu cocked his head sideways and stood there for a few seconds, confused. Misaki wasn't his mother or grandmother's name. He was an only child and didn't have any sisters. It was a name he had never heard of before, so he replied, "There's no one here by that name." The shadow paused for a bit and asked,
Kosuke isn't there anymore.
Again, Masahiro had no idea who this person was. He was trying to decide how to answer when the shadow continued.
You isn't here anymore.
The wireless radio suddenly beeped and I jumped in my seat. Someone from the bottom of the mountain was trying to contact us to tell us that they'd closed the lifts for the day due to the bad weather and to put the lifts in the warehouse. They needed people for that, so I decided to head down the mountain. As I left the station, I turned around to wave to Masahiro, and I might be mistaken, but I thought I saw something white standing behind him. By the time we finished storing all the lifts away, I was exhausted. I finished getting changed, and as I made my way to the living area, I could hear a lot of commotion. Apparently, one of our co-workers got into an accident and was taken to the hospital. He was working on putting away the quad lifts when there was some kind of mistake and he got crushed between two lifts. No one actually witnessed it, but we all knew how heavy these lifts were. And with the power of the automated cables, it was clear to us that if a person got crushed between them, it would only have catastrophic consequences. In the midst of the panic, Masahiro quickly retired to his dorm room, his face pale. I quickly ran after him, asked if he was all right. He replied in a voice barely audible. His name. He didn't get to finish his story from earlier that day, so he said, "All the names that shadow said, they're all people who have died. Misaki was a girl in my year in elementary school. She transferred to another school, but she got into an accident and passed away. Kosuke, he was a co-worker of mine when I first started working. He got ill one day and he died due to it. The last name the shadow said, which was you. It was the only name I didn't know anything about. But the guy who just got into that accident today, his name is you." Neither him nor I could make sense of what was happening, but we could feel there was something strange at work here. Masahiro then added, "I can't remember much of what happened afterwards, but I remember what this shadow figure looked like." He didn't explain how he saw the shadow, but he continued to describe its appearance. Its outline was that of a person's, but its joints were all bent in different directions, almost as if someone took a doll and bent its limbs into impossible angles. His face was looking straight up and his jaw was ripped open, with the bottom jaw dangling above his chest. His upper jaw and the rest of his face was bent towards his back. Masahiro couldn't see its actual face, so he couldn't tell whether it was male or female, and he couldn't see anything apart from its jaws. From it, there were numerous finger-like appendages coming out and wriggling around like worms. It was so grotesque that he remembers it so clearly. As if this wasn't enough, this thing would suddenly move extremely fast and its limbs would pop back into that of a person standing normally, while its face remained unchanged. After a while, its arms and legs would snap and it would take an impossible form again. This happened over and over again, as if someone was fast-forwarding a videotape. All this movement is what made it look like it was swaying back and forth. The reason why he told me this story is because he remembered me telling him once that I liked scary stories and that maybe I'd be the only one who would believe his experience. After Masahiro got everything off his chest, we both agreed to not talk about it anymore, and we went back to our rooms. We continued working together, and Masahiro went back to his normal self until the ski season was over and our jobs ended. On our last day, when we were all celebrating the end of the season, he was the life of the party, telling his usual jokes and hyping everyone up. As the night was winding down, I saw him standing and staring out the window with a face frozen in fear. His eyes were bloodshot and I couldn't approach him because there was a part of me that didn't want to know what he was seeing. But he soon snapped out of it, turned to me and said, "I had a good time tonight. Good night." Before he walked off, I asked if there was something wrong. He replied in his quiet tone again, "Yeah, just had déjà vu again, That's all. I got goosebumps as soon as he said it, and Masahiro quickly went to his room, leaving me standing there. A few years later, there was a huge disaster at the ski resort and many people were killed. As soon as I heard about it on the news, I called Masahiro. He said, "That night, when I got back into my room, my déjà vu ended. Then I heard someone tapping on my window. I was too scared to move and stood still, but then I heard that same voice, and I saw that same shadow. It sounded as if the shadow was there to ask for someone again. It said,
Is Moa there?
The shadow continued to ask for several people. It didn't stop. Masahiro tried to look up the names that he could remember from this night, and they happened to coincide with the names of the people that were killed at the ski resort. What is this shadow being? I don't want to go searching for it, that's for sure. The last thing Masahiro said to me was, "This shadow always comes when there's a snowstorm." After I hung up the phone, I looked out the window and it was snowing heavily. I instinctively shut the curtains for fear that I might see something out there. I heard this story from Corinne, a woman who works at a small electrical and lighting store. She was working part-time, and every day she'd go into the shop for a few hours to take care of accounting and to clean up. The people who worked at the store included the owner and 2 full-timers plus herself. Depending on the shift, there were only 3 of them at the store. The business was going well, so during lunch sometimes there was only 1 person manning the store. Corinne didn't like working by herself. They were located in a very old 2-story building that used to sell Western goods. The first floor, which is where the actual shop was operating out of, had been renovated so it was bright and beautiful. However, the second floor hadn't been touched, so it was dimly lit and smelled mouldy. The shop front was also kept intact from the previous shop. It was your normal glass window that stretched from the ground all the way to the ceiling. The new owner had made this space into their office, so anyone walking or driving past could see straight into it. Corinne didn't like that feeling, so whenever she was working, she tried to hide behind the computer monitor as much as possible. The customers included those who needed electrical work done and those who were working in the building industry. Oftentimes they came in just to say hello and have a chat for a bit. One day, one of the regulars, an elderly man who lived in the neighborhood, came by the shop and told Corinne something that scared her. The following is what he said. 30 years ago, this area was a busy shopping district and many people visited daily, making the place very vibrant. As the years went on and private cars became the main mode of transportation, bigger department stores began to pop up everywhere. Larger stores were built along the main streets, and this particular district got less and less foot traffic. Many small shops went bankrupt and had to close. Some shops burnt down, most likely due to arson, and gradually it became a place void of people, especially after dark. Soon after, people who had committed crimes in other towns fled to this area, breaking into the closed-down shops and living in them quietly. Most shops had tatami mats on the second floor, complete with electricity, water, and toilet, so these fugitives used them as their own. Of course, none could stay there long term because they were eventually found and taken into custody. The old man telling the story described how he observed one man being taken away by force by those who looked to be loan sharks. The man was yelling out that he'll escape again and come back and kill them all. When a department store was built in the center of this old shopping district, it brought back some people again and led to how it is today. It was 10 years ago that this current shop owner started leasing this building and began his electrical and lighting business. It was a bit far from any parking space, so when asked why he rented a shop in such an inconvenient place, he said it was because it was dirt cheap. It was after hearing about the history of this neighborhood that Corinne began to notice something. Sometimes in the afternoon, when she was working at the furthest desk, she felt someone's presence by the stairs. She'd slowly walk towards it and peer around the corner, but she never saw anyone there. Other times, she heard footsteps coming from the second floor. She called out, "Is anyone there?" but never got any replies. Just like what the old man described, the second floor in this shop also had tatami floors, and although the walls were lined with shelves that stored construction materials and other tools, there actually was a toilet and a sink and faucet, so someone definitely could live there if they really wanted to. Corinne got curious whether anyone had ever lived in this actual building before, so she went up to the second floor. She went into the closet and reached up to open the hatch that led to the attic. When she peeked in, she saw a cardboard box at the far corner of the attic. It was an old box used to package apples, and it wasn't that heavy, she explained. She brought the box down using a stepladder and dusted the box off. There was postage on it which told her that it had been sent to a certain address but came back here because it was unable to be delivered. Corinne remembered that it was sent to a woman living in Gunma Prefecture. She hesitated a bit before deciding to open the box and go through its contents. She found an old tattered black backpack and below it some men's clothes, a small radio, an alarm clock, and other bits and bobs. After looking at those, she turned her attention to the bag and opened it. There were some socks and underwear, a toothbrush, a shaver, other everyday mundane objects, a little notebook, and a diary. It was then that she found something she wished she didn't see. The notebook was bulging towards the center, so she opened it up and an envelope fell out. When she looked at what was written on it, she realized it was someone's last will. She froze in place and tried to think things through logically, and this is what she came up with. A man fled into this building years ago and either committed suicide or was caught. The owner found this box and sent it to his family member, but it got returned because there was no one living at that address anymore. She put everything back the way it was and returned it to the attic, pretending she didn't see anything. All of this happened such a long time ago, and there's nothing I can do about it now anyway, she mumbled. I asked her, "Did you read the will?" Corinne waved her hands from side to side and said, "No way, I'm too scared to read what's written in it. But it wasn't glued or anything, so it's definitely doable. It's sitting up in the attic as we speak, and I'm still contemplating what to do with it." Now this is where things started to get creepy. She continued, "I'm thinking maybe this man's ghost is still in the building. I can feel someone's presence there." I replied rather calmly, "Well, his private things, including his will, is there, so it would make sense that his spirit might still be there." Right? I'm so freaked out that I want to quit my job, but if I tell my boss the truth, he'll probably freak out too, and I just don't know what to do with all this information. I honestly couldn't bring myself to believe that there was an actual ghost there after all these years, but seeing how scared she was tugged at my thoughts. A few days later, on a sunny afternoon, I got a sudden message from Corinne. It said, "Come to the shop, there's something I need to show you." When I got there, I asked her what was wrong. She looked like she was about to cry and said, "One of our repeat customers, an old lady from down the street, just came in to see me, and she told me there was another woman standing next to me." At this time, Corinne was the only one in the shop, so she obviously freaked out when the lady said that there was someone else there. "But," I said, "if anything, shouldn't the ghost be a male and not a female?" "Exactly," she cried out. "That's what I thought too, so I asked the lady if she was sure that it was a female, and she said the silhouette was definitely that of a female. Of course I didn't see anything." Corinne was too scared to stay at the shop by herself after the old woman left, so she was quickly getting ready to leave when the phone rang. She picked it up and took out a memo pad from the desk. After hanging up and waiting for her heart rate to calm down, she looked down at the pad. She noticed that there was a number on it, so she opened the desk drawer again and took out the rest. They were all old with a green cover and only about 10 centimeters in width. There were 6 of them in total, numbered from 5 to 10. After telling me this much, she slowly took out the 10th pad and handed it to me. "Look inside," she said quietly. I did as I was told and opened the pad. Each page was filled with writing as if someone had used it as some sort of diary. It was full of details about what this person was apparently experiencing. The penmanship was weak and shaky, as if whoever wrote it was trembling when they were writing. These notepads and other stationery was given to the boss when he had gone to do electrical work for a stationery store that went out of business. Apparently, the ones numbered 1 through 4 were already used up, and 5 through 9 were unused, so no one noticed this until now. Corinne took the notepad from me, opened it to a certain page, and handed it back. I looked down, and it read, "My last will." I immediately felt a chill as I looked around, but there was no one but Corinne and myself in the shop. I'd never seen a will written by other people until this exact moment. I shuddered as the hair on my neck stood up. Her full name and her birth date was also written so we could determine that it was a woman in her 60s. I won't tell you what was written inside due to privacy concerns, but this person's pain and agony and what she wanted to happen after her death was written in great detail. Corinne's heart ached when she read it that she began to cry, and that's when she contacted me. I felt the exact same way as I read this woman's will. Now, Corinne had discovered 2 separate wills written by 2 people who seemed to have nothing to do with each other from within this building. It felt like some sort of bad omen, and because she'd seen both of them, I was worried that something bad might happen to her. She sent the second will to the address that was written inside. It was the address of the woman's son, who was already an adult by this time. He confirmed that his mother was already deceased. When it came time to go pay the monthly rent, Corinne asked the landlord about the old cardboard box in the attic. "Ah, that box. That's from quite a long time ago. The man's still alive. Apparently, he just took his wallet and ran away. He called and told me he'd come and get that box, but he didn't, so I tried to send it to an address that I found in his notebook. It came back though because no one was living there anymore. I put it up in the attic and I completely forgot about it until just now." After this, the landlord promptly got rid of the old box, and thus the 2 wills were finally gone from the building. Corinne stopped feeling another person's presence too, and it all seemed like everything was back to normal. A few days ago, I was driving by the shop and saw her in the office. Because of the traffic lights, I was inching along slowly, and, as usual, I looked into the shop to see whether she was working. It was brightly lit inside, and I could see straight through the glass window. I saw her in the shop with 2 customers, a woman who was standing next to her, and near the stairs at the back, a man. I continued to drive, parked my car at the department store, and messaged her. "Are you alone right now? If you are, I might pop in for a bit." "Yep, I'm alone. Come on by." For obvious reasons, I decided not to go. Before I begin, I just want to say that there were 2 distinct times when looking for a new place to live that I instinctively got a bad feeling. We ended up not living in either of those places, but the following story is something that I believe in wholeheartedly. And if you have time, I'll explain my own experiences at the very end of this video. For now, let me tell you today's 3rd and final story. A relative of mine who is very shrewd and highly intuitive always used to say to my mother, "When you move into a new place, make sure you always visit the place beforehand. If you feel something is off, never live in it." We used to move around a lot because of my parents' work, so I guess it was advice that came from a place of worry. I was still small, so I didn't think much of it, other than the fact that moving houses wasn't an easy task. As I got older, I forgot about the warning, and when I started uni, one of my best friends moved into a new apartment. It was her first time to live alone, and she invited me over to her new place. After changing trains a few times, I finally got off in her area. It was a small town, but there were many stores around the train station and a huge shopping mall, but it wasn't overly busy and it seemed like a really nice place to live. Impressed, I said to her, "This is a pretty nice area." "It is, isn't it?" she replied, obviously quite content about her choice. We stopped at one of the ramen shops and had a late lunch, then walked towards her apartment. It was close to the station and was small and simple. The apartment was mainly for single people and most of the curtains were shut, so I assumed many were still out at work or something. It was hard to tell how old the building was, but it was a dull grey colour and it didn't really look like a place where a young woman would live by herself. On top of that, it was dark. "It's a bit dark, isn't it?" I said to my friend as we walked through the mailboxes past the entrance. She tilted her head. I guess the sunlight doesn't reach in much, and besides, the sun's going down now." That's true, I thought, as I turned back and looked out at the streets. But it wasn't just the amount of light that made the place feel dark. There was something else that felt oppressing. I didn't have the heart to tell my friend how I truly felt because I was afraid I might burst her bubble, so I kept my mouth shut. We went into her apartment and we were drinking some tea and gossiping when she pointed up at the ceiling and said, "So, there's another girl living above me who goes to the same uni. She's a year older and she sometimes comes to visit." "Oh, you're so lucky. It's nice to have someone close that can help you with uni work." "Yeah, and she sometimes brings me home-cooked meals too. It's awesome." I nodded in agreement and thought she was pretty lucky to have that support so close by. It seemed to help my friend get over her worries about living alone for the first time in her life, and I was happy for her. I pushed the earlier thoughts to the back of my mind. The sun went down, and after having dinner, I suddenly got so drowsy that I could barely keep my eyes open. It was only a little after 7 p.m. Considering I always stay up past midnight, it was weird that I was feeling this tired at such an early hour. My friend noticed and she was kind enough to lay out a futon for me, saying I was probably tired from the long train ride over. "Don't worry, have a rest. I'm going to stay up a bit longer and just watch TV." I apologized to her as I snuggled into the futon. I barely remember even closing my eyes as I fell into a deep sleep. Not even 30 minutes later, someone was shaking me awake. It was my friend. "What's wrong?" she said. "Isn't that what I should be saying right now?" I thought to myself. She looked worried and continued, "You were talking in your sleep and moving around. Did you have a nightmare?" I didn't know what she was talking about because I had absolutely zero recollection and couldn't remember what I dreamed about. She must have meant that I was tossing and turning a lot. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea. I feel a bit embarrassed, especially seeing that your neighbor from upstairs came for a visit." My friend's face changed into a confused expression. "What do you mean? No one's come over except for you." Now it was my turn to get confused. "Stop lying. I saw her right there when you woke me up," I said as I pointed in the direction of my feet. My friend looked over and I could see her body stiffen. I continued on. "She has black shoulder-length hair. She was wearing a white top and a blackish checkered skirt. She was sitting right there and she was staring down so I couldn't see her face, but she's the neighbor you were talking about, right?" She shook her head from side to side. "No, she doesn't have shoulder-length hair." You really don't remember what you were doing while you were sleeping?" According to her, I started moving around while I was sleeping, which caught her attention, so she watched me for a while. I then started to shoo away something that was at my feet, almost as if I was saying for it to not get any closer. My friend got scared, so she decided to wake me up. I didn't know how to respond. Come to think of it, if the girl I saw really was her neighbor, then when did she leave the apartment? I didn't even hear the door, and it would be strange to leave without even saying goodbye. We did our best to forget what just happened, and both decided to go to bed early that night. She was scared to live there by herself after this experience, but thankfully, nothing else happened until she moved out after graduating from uni. In Japan, real estates are required by law to notify potential occupants if someone has died in the property. This does not include natural or accidental deaths, but if someone got murdered or committed suicide, then they were required to let the prospective tenants know. My friend's unit didn't have any sinister past, so why did I see that girl the day I went to sleep over at her place? My relative answered that question for me. She said, "It's to do with your compatibility with the place." It sounded strange to hear about being compatible with a place, but she continued, "Some people might get affected at a certain house while others feel absolutely nothing. That's why I've always stressed the importance of going to a potential new home and walking through it to see how it feels. If ever you feel even a little bit off, trust it and never accept to live there." I will never forget this again. After all, your personal safety is of utmost importance. So please, if you ever have to move to a new place, keep these words in your mind and trust your gut instinct. I mean, you wouldn't want to wake up in the middle of the night and see someone staring at you from the foot of the bed, would you? Now, let me tell you a couple of experiences that I had. The first time was when I came back to Japan for summer break when I was studying at uni in Australia. My mum was looking for a new place to move into, and I tagged along for one of her viewings. It was a small apartment complex in a nice and convenient area, but the building itself was older than the surrounding complexes. I felt it as soon as I stepped foot onto the property. A narrow walkway led to the side of the building, which was where the entrance was located. My legs suddenly felt heavy as I stepped onto the property, and we made our way to the entrance. The space was extremely cramped and dark, even though it was noon and the sun was directly above us. The unit that was for rent was the first one you come across as you go into the building. I followed the real estate agent and my mum as they made their way to the unit, the entire time feeling like I was dragging my legs to keep up. As soon as he opened the door to the apartment, the smell of mold wafted out and I could see dead insects and spider webs everywhere. I didn't even step foot into the apartment. I remained outside, looking around nervously, wanting to leave the place. I don't remember whether my mum went inside to look around, but as soon as we were back in the light and onto the streets, the feeling disappeared. That was the only viewing we had that day, and I told my mum straight away that something was off about that place and to look for a different apartment. She told me she didn't feel anything, but she trusted my opinion and ended up not taking it. The second time I felt this way was when I was looking for a place with my partner. Once again, this was in Japan. We were shown to an old apartment complex. It was quite cheap for its size, so we reached out to go see the place. As we walked into the unit, once again, I had this weird feeling at the pit of my stomach. The bathroom and the toilet were renovated, but nothing else had been touched. I looked into those 2 rooms and walked straight out, waiting for my partner to finish looking around the entire unit. For some reason, I didn't want to go walking around the different rooms. When we were out and alone, I told him I didn't like it and that I felt something off about the place. He doesn't believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything paranormal, so I had to do a bit of convincing, but thankfully I won the argument and we moved into a much smaller but beautiful place that had no negative energy to speak of. As you can see, when I read the third story, it really resonated with me and I just had to share my own experiences to prove a point. I believe that people have instincts and gut feelings for a reason. We're so consumed by technology and our fast-paced life that we're slowly forgetting how to feel our animal instincts. If you ever get a strong sensation that something is off, please make sure you trust it. One last thing. If you've ever experienced something similar, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to read them. Thanks again for tuning in and see you again next week.